What advice do you have for those whose fear is, I don't know how I would answer some questions that they might have, be they theological, be they just more like a society concern or a
Yeah.
difference in definitions of things. Like you mentioned the word justice earlier. There's some very different definitions floating around there. So how do you teach people? What advice do you give for those
Mm.
that are afraid of receiving questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. First thing I would say, we touched on it a little bit, is obviously just learn some general conversational tools. And so the heart of this book teaches that very, very practical stuff. If you're a heavy sort of thinker, it's still good to learn those. If you're not, it's great to learn those too. So being equipped with some conversational tools, because that will teach you things like, before you even get into answering the question, learning to ask questions back can be helpful. So one thing I teach in the book is, when someone raises a difficult question, and of course, yeah, I understand you might panic, your adrenaline level goes up, your heart rate raises, just to begin by saying, that's a great question, why do you ask it? Can be very, very helpful. A good example would be, someone who says to you something like, Clay, how on earth can you believe in a good God when there's suffering and evil in the world? It's quite a big, scary question. The people listening to this may be, wow, I don't know how to answer that. But it might be that when you say, that's a really interesting question, tell me, why do you ask that? Well, if you discover that the reason they're asking that is because they've just lost a loved one to cancer, it may actually be that your role in that conversation is not to try and give some clever theological answer. That's the last thing that person needs. What they need is someone to listen and weep with them and have them tell them story and say, look, I don't have all the answers, and what you've been through is terrible. May I pray with you? And I've had conversations like that where I haven't had to draw upon the theology that I do know. What somebody wants is a pastoral answer. And that's also a reminder, by the way, to those of us who are theologically equipped. Sometimes being theologically equipped can be a handicap, because we reach too quickly for the let's go for the smart answer, where actually the person might need something more pastoral. So
Right.
beginning by digging into the question. And then the other thing we do in the book is I teach people a fairly straightforward series of steps that we won't go into now, because it will take probably a bit too long to go through, but a fairly simple series of steps that you can work through with any question, that teach you to begin, sympathizing a bit with the person that I've just described, teach you how to begin exploring the question a bit with the other person, and unpack it a bit, and particularly as well show how they have some things to answer. A good example there would be the problem of evil. If an atheist friend raises that, well, of course, our atheist friends have an issue with the problem of evil. Their problem is, how do you define good and evil if everything is just atoms in motion? What makes one configuration of atoms good and one configuration of atoms bad? Hard to tell. So it's good to learn how to gently show the person, actually, they've got some thinking to do here. And then the next kind of steps along the journey are showing you how to begin digging into the question a bit, but particularly digging in by bringing the Jesus into the conversation. Because really, I think our task when we're given hard questions is not to try and give these amazing philosophical answers, if that's even possible, but to give a good answer, but an answer that points people to Jesus. Because obviously what we want ultimately is for people to encounter him, not just go away going, my word, I asked, Clay, I asked Andy, I asked that Christian friend of mine this question, and they just gave this amazing answer with Latin
Right.
footnotes and everything. Yeah, well done. But also you missed something. And by the way, that's not to downplay apologetics or clever answers. I love this stuff. I know you do, and many listeners to your show probably do too. But the reminder for us too, who love this stuff, that ultimately it's Jesus we're trying to connect people with, not our own cleverness. And then lastly, I just talk in the book a little bit about, there are great ways, I think, to get prepared ourselves. If you get asked a question you don't know, do not be afraid of saying to your friend, do you know, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. That's a brilliant question. And I haven't really thought about that before. But if that question really matters to you, if that's a question that you would really value an answer to, leave it with me, and I'll go and find the answer to that. I'll do that for you, and we can perhaps grab a coffee in a week or two, and then be good to your word. Talk to an older, wiser Christian. Talk to a pastor. Great apologetic websites, great apologetic podcasts. I can think of one right now, and so on. And then come back to your friend. And actually, it's amazing. Actually, when you do that, that opens doors. The fact that you've taken the time to dig the answers out, the time you've gone back to your friend and gone, thank you for that question. It was brilliant. And I actually really valued the chance of my own faith to do some digging into that. And look, I think I've got what I think is a fairly good answer. Let's talk about it. The fact that you valued them enough to do that and follow up can be very powerful too. So just because you don't know the answer right now doesn't matter. You are a human being, not a walking incarnation of Chat GPT or Wikipedia. So just because you don't have the answer on tap is not something to be afraid of.
Yeah. So much of this just boils down to you are a person talking to a person and trying to point them to the person of Jesus Christ. And that is the task of evangelism. That's the goal of these evangelistic conversations.